We need to introduce our last speaker for this segment, and that is Vanessa Lavallé. Vanessa is a PhD student in religious studies at the University of Quebec in Montreal, and also holds a degree in ancient religions from the United Kingdom. She studies demons, sex, and gender in the Western world. So, Vanessa, if you are there.
I'm just going to unmute. Can you hear me well?
We can hear and see you. Perfect.
Great. So I'm just going to share. So I apologize for a few repetitive information that I will give. Some speakers did share same information that I will. So my apologies for that. Let's see. Share. I'm not very good with PowerPoint and stuff. All right.
We're already there. Excellent.
Great. So everyone sees everything okay. Great. Super. Great. So I want to thank Caroline and Stephanie for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here with such great scholars. So it's my first time presenting in such a great context. So I have much interest in the reception of ancient iconographies and deities in contemporary movements, specifically neo-paganism and occult movements. So while studying demons in the ancient Mesopotamian world during my master's, it has led me to take notice of the modern cult of the demoness Lilith, which I see very much in a lot of different occult and pagan movements. So for this very short presentation, because there's so much to say, I decided to focus on a particular group from France that calls themselves Luciferians, but they identify themselves as being part of Western Wiccan movement, but they also recently changed their naming to Striga witchcraft, inspired by Italian witchcraft, Strigeria. So I would like to specify that they also identify as a left-hand path movement. So the main focus of my presentation is the reception of nudity and its agency in this contemporary cult. So I'm doing for the thesis ethnographic study. So the preliminary data I gathered for this presentation was taken from informal conversations with members of the group and from the official book published in 2018 by the current leader of the movement. But first of all, who is Lilith? Lilith is now a figure in popular culture known as the first wife of Adam, a queen of demons, but also a dangerous seductress. She is known in the late antique Jewish folklore as a demonic creature who snatches babies away from their mother. And also she would take childbirthing mothers as well. So people would protect themselves against her. Still today in some Jewish Orthodox groups. So this is one of the first image we have of the original Lilith. So the association of Lilith as being the first wife of Adam comes from a late tale from the Middle Ages that emerged from the satirical alphabet of Ben Sira. She was known before that, of course, but as a demonic spirit meant to regulate birth. So the original creature that some think could have inspired the creation of Lilith comes from the Mesopotamian demoness and goddess Lamashtu and ancient little spirits. In Jewish mysticism, later in Middle Ages, such as the Kabbalah, Lilith becomes the mother of a plethora of demons, a great queen of hell, being the wife of both Asmodeus and Samael. And this is because there is two Lilith, according to this literature. So this is another ancient Lilith. But today, Lilith is mostly known in contemporary esoteric movements as a goddess associated with the image of a naked goddess and specifically ones that comes from Mesopotamia. So those naked images would probably rather be the figures of other goddesses such as Inanna or Sister Ereshkigal. So in this presentation, we will observe how this Luciferian contemporary movement came to associate these ancient iconographies and how they use them in the cult they give to Lilith. So here Lilith is a snake, so she is tempting Eve. So this is images from the medieval times. So she very much transformed through history. So if we go back in time, the various contemporary movements inspired by ancient religions developed mostly in the 20th century and are therefore almost all tinged with a dated vision. This vision was brought both by European and American religious scholars and anthropologists, and by the wave of Romanticism, who developed a whole symbolic universe of nature seen in the form of goddesses. Lilith was indeed very popular with romantics as she transformed from being a not quite so pretty demon to a very sensual redhead in art. In the European culture and folklore, Lilith was already very present at the end of antiquity, and therefore she was mixed in many literature, artistic, and occult interpretation. So let us now see the background, a little bit of background that gave rise to modern paganism and their views on ancient nudity and pagan goddesses and how this relates to Lilith. So James Frazer did not invent the theory of the witch cult survival of Europe, but just like other scholars of his time, such as Jules Michelet, he was interpreting some modern practices, well, from his time, from rural Europe, as having survived from more ancient fertility cults. In his work, he explicitly presents the Roman goddess Diana, for example, as being a nature goddess whose mating with the god Dianus would bring fertility to the land. His analysis mentioned that sex between humans could then have the same magical effect on the fertility of the lands. His vision of ancient pagan rituals being overtly sexual and erotic has endured well into modern paganism. A few years after the publication of the Golden Bough, Aradia, the Gospel of the Witches by Charles Godfrey Leland, was published and served as the founding narrative of an entire modern witchcraft movement, as we have seen earlier. This mythical work explains that the goddess Aradia, a modification of the biblical name Herodias, would have been the daughter of Diana and Lucifer, and that she would have come to earth to teach magic to oppressed and outcast people. But Leland tells us that, in fact, Aradia is Lilith, according to his source. Well, Herodias and Aradia name is the same as Lilith. So the movement that were born from these folklores and myths indeed have very great reverence for Lucifer and Lilith, who are perceived as celestial beings representing light. They are the emanation of Dianus and Diana. Lilith becomes the ultimate deity who is there to defend the oppressed against the castrating Christianity, according to the theology of these groups. About 30 years later, Margaret Murray, who published the popular Witch Cult of Europe thesis, was also inspired by the work of James Frazer and possibly Leland too. She claimed that ancient Europe would have had a cult dedicated to a horn god called Dianus, and that her female form was Diana, which would have survived Christianization. What she writes about strongly influenced the birth of Wicca. Indeed, she calls group of practitioners covens, which reportedly had 13 members and were secretly initiated. These groups would therefore have practiced all kinds of magical rituals under the patronage of a god with qualities similar to Lucifer. These presence of a horn god, as well as a mother goddess was meaningful for sexual rights and ensuring fertility. This ideology, as we know, became the very foundation of Wiccan theology. Indeed, for Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valiente, they do give some importance to the name of Lilith as being an aspect of different goddesses, such as Inanna, Ishtar, Anat, Diana, or Isis. In these different variations, she is seen as a mother, a sexual woman, and bringer of fertility. She is almost always depicted as a symbol of lust and suppressed desire, but also as a mother to those who suffer. And finally, the English poet Robert Graves, much later, who is also known to have been inspired by Frazer, with his work called The White Goddess, says that Lilith typifies the Anat-worshipping Canaanite women who were permitted prenuptial promiscuity. So there is evidence in the development of Lilith and her integration into magical groups that she is clearly associated to ancient world goddesses who were conceived as sexual and fertility figures themselves. But which image is Lilith associated with them today? This one. So since the retrieval of the Burney relief in the 1930s or so from ancient Babylonia, the first interpretation made for it was that it represented Lilith, although it is now mostly agreed that the goddess of this plaque relief could be the underworld queen Ereshkigal or even Inanna herself. Archaeologist Marija Gimbutas, in her book published in the 90s, still interpreted this image as a goddess known as Lilith. As she quotes, open quotes, "This ambivalent image is a dim reflection diffused through time of the owl as an incarnate manifestation of the fearsome goddess of death. She was revered as a divinity and perhaps respected for a grim but necessary part in the cycle of existence. In Mesopotamia, she was known as Lilith, whose name means screech, howl." So we know that Gimbutas has had an enormous influence on modern neo-pagan and goddess spiritualities, and she too perpetuated this idea that there were once a goddess cult in ancient times. So how is Lilith perceived by my French Luciferians? So the development of Luciferian Wicca, so they still call themselves Wicca, in France remains quite unclear. But according to current practitioners, the founders of this tradition would have been initiated in Wales in a traditional Wiccan coven in the 60s, directly in the line of Gerald Gardner. They would have brought this knowledge back to France and founded their own coven, whose teachings would have been perpetuated until today. In this tradition, in reality, somehow quite different from traditional British Wicca, there is a mixture of demonic occultism, Gardnerian Wicca, and Italian witchcraft inspired from the Gospels of Arabia. This group was known to perform the sacred marriage or great rites and other rituals, almost all the time naked or with other sexual rites. But in this tradition, Lilith, as a goddess, must be represented naked. So I will quote the author of the book now. "To represent her, statues or image of naked women, free and inviting to pleasure, will do very well as depictions of provocative women. Great importance is therefore attached to the iconography of Lilith by representing her as a naked goddess. As we will see, sorry, I'm lost. You have to, yeah, as we will see, you have to also have a copy sometimes of the Mesopotamian Burney relief. even though this group's vision is imbued with the amalgamation of Lilith as an aspect of Diana, they still consider that Lilith originated in ancient Mesopotamia. I will quote again, Lilith is a mother goddess whose trace can be traced back from the Upper Paleolithic, snake goddess, winged goddess, or mermaid. It is clear that we have in the relief of Burney an amalgam of symbols and images which represents both Inanna and Lilith. The general message of this image is that of sexual activity, fertility, and dominion over nature, end quote. So there is no doubt that for these devotees, Lilith is a mother goddess whose naked figure from Mesopotamia and that transform into time into Diana is the emblem par excellence. She is also being associated to the goddess Isis and of course Hecate. So how do they use these images in the cult? Because the union of Lilith and Lucifer is a symbolic force of the male and the female principles, they are very often both present on altars, as we have seen here. Like mentioned earlier, the nudity is important to reflect the sensuality and sexual power they hold. Lilith must be usually on the left and Lucifer on the right. Offerings are made in the form of blood or sex. Red is the color associated to her, and as such, her sigil or magical symbol is also painted in red. This symbol will be put up in a triangle. I don't know if I can see it here, which symbolize the feminine sex. To contact her in this tradition, practitioners will use a spirit bottle while meditating. And this is where depiction is quite important. The book states that the devotee needs to visualize her naked with long hair, black or red, her eyes being dark, shown with horns, or as a siren, and being visualized as a sensual woman, as a giver of pleasure, as it is believed that pleasurable offerings are suitable for this goddess. The practitioner needs to visualize the image he chose to represent Lilith as being imbued with a scarlet light. And after a prayer, she would come and visit the icon dedicated to her and hear the pleas of her children. Although it is specified that she could be a dangerous goddess, the person who becomes a devotee of Lilith will celebrate her on the dark moon, very often alongside the goddess Hecate. Of course, if possible, they suggest to perform the ritual in the nude. So the majority, I think we'll see it here. I forgot to put it. So the majority of the pentacles used for the rites of Lilith are magical ones bearing the name of the goddess Astarte. So this comes from Goetic and Kabbalistic magic. So they will use symbols, and we clearly see Ashtaroth or Astarte written, and I forgot to include these. So once again, linking the ancient figures of Inanna, Ishtar, and Astarte as being the same entity as Lilith. So here's another example of contemporary authors that were very nicely sent to me. So we can see all different representation of Lilith, always naked, always very much often associated to the owl and the red color. To have other ones. No, I think that was the spores. So in conclusion, we can see that the early 20th century scholarship has brought a simplistic view of the ancient gods and goddesses, with the male and female principal duo seen as the representation of fertility and heteronormativity, while the deities of the ancient world, and specifically demons and the demoness Lilith, were more complex than that. Thank you very much for your attention.